Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little uncomfortable. We're going to look right past that glittering skyline of the American dream and examine a much harsher systemic reality. We're exploring what it actually costs to survive in modern America, a place where, for millions of people, being poor feels less like a temporary struggle and more like an ongoing, relentless punishment. Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine working every single day and still feeling like society is slowly crushing you. Now, in the richest country in human history, this isn't just some dramatic quote. This is the daily, visceral reality for millions of people. The sources we're looking at today highlight these heartbreaking human stories, like a mother who regularly skips dinner just so her kids can eat, or a delivery driver who literally has to sleep in his car between shifts. And this isn't about a lack of effort or ambition. It's about a system where the basic act of survival has just become incredibly expensive. Which brings us right to Section 1, the hidden American reality, and what happens when survival becomes expensive. It's kind of a massive paradox, right? Globally, the perception of America is one of endless success, gleaming skyscrapers, record-breaking wealth, the whole shebang. But down on the ground level, the hidden reality is vastly different. Millions of people are living paycheck to paycheck, burdened by crushing debt, and just terrified of medical bankruptcy. The scary truth is that so many hardworking people are just one single emergency away from total disaster. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what economists call the invisible taxes of poverty. We're talking late fees, overdraft charges, high-interest payday loans. Think about it. If a wealthy person misses a payment, it's a minor inconvenience. But if a struggling person misses one, they get hit with fees they already can't afford, which then threatens their electricity, their transportation, or even their job. It's a brutal irony. The less money you have in the bank, the more expensive your daily life actually becomes. So, moving on to Section 2, why survival is expensive, the systemic drivers of pressure. To really understand how we got here, we have to look at the root economic causes. For decades, American productivity went up and up. Workers became way more efficient, technology advanced at lightning speed, and corporate profits absolutely exploded. But wages for everyday workers? They pretty much stagnated. While salaries effectively stood still, the fundamental costs of living, things like housing, healthcare, education, they completely surged. The American dream simply became too expensive to buy into, making basic stability incredibly fragile. And adding psychological fuel to that economic fire is this pervasive cultural message: you are what you own. Modern consumerism, which is obviously amplified by social media, has created this culture of relentless comparison. Every time you scroll, you're comparing your very real private struggles to someone else's highly curated public highlight reel. Even if you have shelter and a job, this environment makes you feel like you are constantly failing. It silently destroys your self-worth and leads to profound emotional exhaustion. Then there's the terror of getting sick. In America, illness is not just a health crisis, it is a potential financial catastrophe. Just think about the gravity of this for a second. We live in a society advanced enough to create artificial intelligence, yet there are millions of people who will hesitate to call an ambulance because they are terrified of the medical debt. They literally fear the hospital bill more than they fear the physical pain. No way it should be like that, right? And we see the exact same paradigm shift with housing. Home ownership used to be the ultimate symbol of American stability. Now, it's a source of constant gnawing fear. Rent prices have surged across the board, forcing families to spend massive portions of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. And here's the thing, when housing becomes unstable, everything else collapses too. Kids struggle in school, mental health deteriorates, communities fracture. It leads to this massive, largely overlooked epidemic of emotional isolation and loneliness. Which naturally leads us into Section 3, the psychological cost, living in survival mode. So the crucial point is, how does this relentless systemic pressure fundamentally alter human cognition? Well, the answer is survival mode. It's a psychological state caused by long-term stress that severely reduces your focus, your patience, emotional control, and your decision-making ability. This is both fascinating and heartbreaking. When an exhausted parent working 2 jobs seems distracted or emotionally unavailable to their kids, they aren't being lazy. They are dealing with severe cognitive overload. Poverty literally changes how the human brain processes the world. Let's walk through what this domino effect actually looks like in a real everyday scenario. Imagine a warehouse worker, clocking 50 hours a week just to make ends meet. First, his car breaks down. Now he faces an impossible choice. Does he fix the car to get to work, or does he pay the rent to keep his home?
the trap is set. Without transport, he loses his job. Without a job, he loses his housing. One minor emergency starts this devastating chain reaction that is incredibly difficult to escape.
And it is super important to note that this pressure spares almost no one. We're seeing a massive cross-generational impact here. Young graduates enter the workforce already drowning in student debt and housing anxiety, constantly feeling like they've fallen behind before they've even really started. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have elderly Americans who worked hard their entire lives, now sitting in retirement, watching inflation quietly consume their life savings, absolutely terrified of becoming a financial burden to their families. That brings us to Section 4. What society risks losing: the collapse of social trust.
When millions of people across all generations deal with this kind of invisible suffering, it poses a direct existential threat to the whole nation. Because people feel deep shame about struggling, they hide it. And when everyone suffers in secret, community trust simply evaporates. People lose optimism that hard work will actually pay off. Young adults delay starting families because they just can't afford it. We see intensifying political polarization. And honestly, most dangerously, a widespread belief takes root that the system is completely rigged for the powerful. When that shared belief in fairness dies, society becomes angrier, much more divided, and incredibly vulnerable to extremism.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, a path toward recovery, reform, empathy, and responsibility. Now, the situation is severe, for sure, but the future isn't fixed. History shows us that when a society chooses collective empathy, recovery is absolutely possible. The solutions span 3 levels. At the individual level, it's about pushing back on that toxic comparison culture we talked about and prioritizing actual, real-world human connection over digital validation. At the community level, we need robust local networks, affordable housing initiatives, food programs, accessible mental health care to catch people before a crisis becomes catastrophic. And at the national level, we've got to address the big systemic issues: healthcare affordability, wage growth, education costs. We need to start framing these not as divisive political slogans, but as basic human survival issues. Because ultimately, true greatness is not measured just by technological advancements or sheer wealth. It is measured by how a society treats people when they struggle. Right now, as our source material clearly shows, the system too often operates in a way that just keeps people exhausted. But behind every single economic statistic is a human being: a mother, a father, a student, a worker. Meaningful reform is entirely possible if we are willing to actually see each other clearly again. So, I want to leave you with this final, incredibly provocative question. How long can a society survive when millions feel abandoned inside it? It's a question we all really need to be asking ourselves. Have you personally experienced this kind of financial pressure, healthcare fear, or economic anxiety? Share your experiences in the comments below, because bringing these hidden realities into the light, that is the very first step toward creating real change. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.